Hey everybody, it's Deborah, and I have another watercolor project for us today. We're going to be painting a flowering cactus. I have a whole layout ready to go, and here's what it looks like. Can you see that? I'm going to be using some masking fluid today. So I got some Winsor Newton Masking Fluid. This is pretty much what I've used most of my watercolor experience, which is many years. But I also used to use something, just a latex that you can use for sculpting as well. So I used to get a big container of that, but I don't have that right now, and so I just got this on Amazon. And another product I wanted to show you was this Winsor Newton white ink. So this is beautiful. I just was playing with my colors yesterday, just experimenting with different colors I might want to use in this project, and I tried the white ink here, and I really like the fact that it doesn't disappear like the white gouache does. So let's give that a try. Also probably use that for the little spikes on the cactus plant. So if this is your first time to my channel, welcome. Please be sure to press that like button and subscribe, and let's get started on this new project for the week. So the first step in our project today is to mask out all the flowers that I have in the buds. So I'm going to be masking out all of those. And so this is the masking fluid that I'm using. And I just wanted to mention that you never want to shake this because it can get a lot of bubbles in it. If you feel it needs to be mixed up, just gently turn it up and down, and then you might want to let it settle down for a few minutes before you start using it. Now when I do masking, I always have a little cup of my masking fluid. I have soap here, and I use Murphy's oil soap. You can use any soap, any dish soap, or you could use laundry detergent. And then this is just clean water. And of course, when you're doing masking, you want to use an old brush, and you can see this is what happens to them after a while, is they kind of get splayed out. I can still get a little bit of a point on this when I'm working with it, and these two are still in the process of being destroyed, but you definitely don't want to be using any of your good watercolor brushes for this application. I'm going to start with this smaller brush. So what I do is I dip my brush in my water, and I have paper towels here. I'll just wipe off a little bit of that water. I'm going to dip it in the soap, and then I'm going to take some of that soap off, but then I'm going to leave soap on the brush, and then I'll dip it into my masking fluid, and that just helps to help you clean the brush a little more thoroughly by having that soap on there. And as you're working, see how much of this I'm putting down. I want to make sure I'm covering everything completely. And with masking fluid, of course, you want to be absolutely certain that it's dry before you paint on top of it. And now I dropped a little right here. I'm going to just pick that up with my finger. And there's still a little on there which I can rub off. And I may have to use my eraser to get the rest of that off. But usually I will use a rubber cement pickup. But you can see I am putting quite a bit down, and that's why I got a little drop there. Just continuing all the way around. And I did not use the masking fluid that has color in it because in the past when I have used that, it has stained my paper. So you may have had a different experience with that. I don't want to have to deal with that in case I'm looking for, a whiter area. in my painting, and if it's a little yellow or sometimes blue, if you're using the one that's tinted blue, that might not be working quite right for you. And you can use other tools here. You can use a stylus or a ruling pen. You can even use, like if you wanted to make dots, you can use like a Q-tip. And I'm going to do a whole video on using masking fluid, all the tips and hints and just some different ideas of how to make it work for your artwork. So going along here. Just getting everything thoroughly covered, and you can probably see the reflection on here, so you can see how much masking fluid I actually have down on there. I'm just moving my way around the painting. So I have covered all my flowers with the masking fluid. And one of the things I wanted to mention is while you're doing this, and if you're doing a large area, you can go in and wash off your brush. I always like to take it to my paper towel and I kind of spin it. You can see a little ring of masking fluid come off of there. And you want to discard that. But it's good to just give it that little twirl, and sometimes just pulling at the bristles. And then you can just go back into your soap and then back into your masking fluid. So you might want to do that a couple times during the time that you're putting down this masking fluid. And so I did drop, a little bit of masking fluid on the paper here. So I want to be absolutely certain before I start painting that I get that up. Because it can be there without you even realizing it. So I will definitely be looking at that as this dries. And so I will let this dry. And then when I come back, we will go ahead and start to do a wash over the entire paper. So once again, I am using this Arches bright white paper. And I considered stretching it, but I'm not thrilled about stretching paper. And some of the ways that I've seen it done with the the craft tape, with craft tape that you wet, I don't like the fact that you have that craft tape left on your painting. The way I used to stretch my paper was I would staple it to a wooden board, and then I would put artist's tape around the edge of that. And since I work fairly small, I don't feel the need to stretch. I have an iron, so I use that when I need to get my paintings to be a little flatter. So I'll be back shortly. So a couple of points I wanted to make about using the masking fluid is that you want to maybe clean your brush out as you go along. So if you have masking fluid on here and you've been working for a while in it, you want to take that and rinse it out in your water, and then take it to your paper towel. So I don't know if you can see that. I'm just kind of twisting it, and a lot of times there'll be a little ring of masking fluid right around the ferrule there, and that will come off. And then if you're going to continue masking, you want to go back into your soap, whatever soap you decide to use, and then you can go back into your masking fluid and then continue with your masking. And then of course when you're finished, wash it out with some soap again and rinse it in some clean water. One of the things I want to mention here is I did drop a little bit of masking fluid onto my paper, so I want to go back in and make absolutely certain that that is all off before I start doing my background wash. And one of the things that I use to remove that is called a rubber cement pickup. And this just gives you a nice clean pickup of your masking fluid. You can use your fingers, make sure they're clean, and you know, I have graphite on mine, and that's probably what happened. It picked up a little of my graphite. So remember those tips, and we'll get going on this and let it dry. And one more tip for masking fluid is that after it's dried a certain amount on your paper, you can use a hair dryer to continue drying it. And you just have to make sure it's completely dry before you put any paint over it. And also when you want to take it off, everything has to be completely dry, bone dry. You don't want to have to deal with your paper tearing or smudging any paint on it. So it's you know, one of those things that we have to get used to doing in watercolor, using some patience. And so, you know, let's go ahead and finish this up. Starting on our initial wash, I always like to wet the paper on both sides. I did want to point out that my masking fluid is all completely dry. You can see it becomes a little more transparent, and that's why the other thing I wanted to show you was just making sure that there aren't any little bits of masking fluid. Could have dropped some. Sometimes there's little spots and you don't notice them, like I think I see one right here. So just bringing it up to reflect in the light, and hopefully that won't show through. So I'm going to start with some clean water, wetting the back. So I have a container of clean water. You can also use a spray bottle if you want to get a little more water on that way, but I pretty much saturate this. And again, this is that Arches bright white paper, which I have to say I feel takes the color a little differently than the regular Arches. So we'll see how that goes with this. I'm working on just a little piece of foam core here to just keep my painting from sliding around. And I'm doing the front now. Again, I'm pretty well saturating everything. And again, looking in the light, making sure there aren't any dry spots. So one of the things I do when I am using the hairdryer to dry either my masking fluid or my paint is that I dry it on both sides. I dry the paper on both sides, and then you're guaranteed more of a level drying on the paper, because sometimes it may feel or look like it's dry and it turns out that it's still a little damp. And if it's cool to the touch, that means it's not dry yet. So I'm going to start off here with a little bit of my permanent violet. Now I'm getting a little bit of my Prussian blue in here as well. I'm trying to use quite a bit of color because I'm afraid that it might not be quite as brilliant as I intend when it's dry, so I'm being a little more bold. So I'm using, that's the cobalt turquoise. Now some of these cactus pears, I might want to lift some of that darker color, and I'm going to be putting in some of my green gold, and I think perhaps a little of my other sap green. But you can see I'm not shy with my color. Now I need to do a little lifting, like right in here, which I have to say, I get so excited when I start to see these colors blending that I just want to play. Play in color. And I think I need a little more violet in here, so I'm going to go in here. Now I got too much green on my brush, so I'm going to clean some of that off and get back into this permanent violet. But I love the way this turquoise is looking. So I might want to be a little careful with my violet around that green gold. I can also bring in some of that aqua green, which is delicious. So, see, my foam core is getting a little bend to it. I'm going to put a little more of that aqua in here, and maybe some more violet on this edge over here. This is the Prussian blue. And you can see what an intense color that can be. I also want to bring in some of this transparent orange. So I have, a half-inch flat here that I'm going to drop some into these cactus pears here and there. Now I want to be careful. It's kind of mixing to brown, and I don't really want that. That's when I can get back to my green gold here. I'll lift a little there. Just put a little more of my green gold in. And generally the color will dry back considerably, so generally it's not too much of an issue. I think I'm going to be taking just a little bit of my rose madder. So this is where I'm using my artistic license because a lot of cactus pears are reds and oranges, and the ones on this cactus don't appear to be, but I am making them so. So that's going to be a little too brown up here. Let's get something prettier. And I think maybe just a little more of the green gold up at the top here. So things are starting to dry, so I want to, be careful not to get a bloom. So I'm going to just let that sit. And I did want to point out that when you have some of your paint on your masking fluid, you can go in and lift that off so that when you do lift the masking fluid or paint on other parts of the painting, you're not smudging that into your painting anywhere. You can also, just use a paper towel, a damp paper towel later to lift some of that off. And I'm just going to let that dry at this point, and we'll come back and start putting some of our detail in. I did use the hair dryer to get it completely dry. Again, if it feels cool to the touch, it's not quite dry enough. At this point, we're going to start working on some of our shapes, our cactus shapes. I'm going to start with some of this sap green. And basically, I'm going to be doing some negative painting around some of these front cactus petals, as well as these pears. Maybe I'll put a little bit on this side as well. So you want to make sure you keep things moving, because this paper does tend to absorb the color and dry faster, although I can't say that I worked on it with a base wash before, so let's see how that works out. So this is the aqua green. I'm going to take some of that up here. So again, I like to do my mixing on the paper. I think I'm going to get a little more pigment here and drop it in so I can make the edge of this one in front a little bit lighter. But again, I want to keep that paint moving. And I do have my handout close by so I can refer to where things are. I think I'm going to drop just a little bit of Prussian blue in here. Now there are some of the cactus petals further back, so those will be even darker. So maybe I want to consider keeping this edge a little lighter as well. Kind of pushing that color over this way and towards the center. So again, I'm getting some of that Prussian blue, but I also want to bring in a little bit of violet. And I'm being careful around this, and I don't have to. I can paint right over, which is so nice. You can mask out as much or as little as you want. I know some people don't care for working with masking fluid, but I feel it has its place. And so this is our permanent violet. I'm going to put that over towards the top here. Maybe getting a little more pigment. Again, this is behind, so it could be a little darker there. But I also want to keep in mind that this is starting to make a little puddle, and I want to be careful that I don't get a bloom, so I can take a damp brush and lift a little there. So I'm actually going to lift a little around the edge here. I want to drop in some of my green gold. Let's see how that works out. It's not the best mix with the violet, but we can maybe amend that with a little bit of our sap green or one of the blues. I am getting a bloom over here, and I don't know, maybe I'll just leave that one. So I want to paint on something that's not touching. So I'm going to go for some of my green gold to start on this next cactus paddle. Painting around my cactus pears. I think one of the colors that I was initially playing with yesterday was this Quinacridone Gold, so I think I'm going to bring some of that in. Let's see how that works. I like it. And what's nice about having that base wash is some of those colors will work their way through the second layer. This is the aqua green. So this is drying fairly fast, so I'm going to go into my violet here, and that mixes beautifully with that aqua. I am going to wet this again because it's already drying. And part of that could just be the fact that it's a fairly warm day. And I'm going to get a little more of that aqua, and I think there's a little of my Prussian blue mixed in with that. I got all these beautiful new colors, and I have no space for them in my palette, so I just have them up here on a plate. Now I did go in before I started here, and I went over my pencil lines because my wash came out quite dark and I couldn't see exactly what I had, so I just brought some of those back. Now something like that I can fix up later because what's behind here will be really dark. And I may be using my Windsor Violet to make that darker in the background. All right. Now let's move over to the other side here. And again, I think I'll start with my green gold on the edge. And then some of the Quinacridone Gold right into that. And just keeping that going as I bring more color in. I think I'll try a little bit of the aqua. And some of the violet. So again, I'm doing my mixing right on the paper. And we'll be glazing over some of these areas again, just to set them a little further back. And here I'll start once again with my green gold, my Quin gold, kind of keeping it a little lighter towards the top edges here. Of course, that's still wet, so you want to be careful going up next to that. And back to the aqua, which isn't that pretty over that violet that's underneath. And this is a little of the sap green on this edge, as this is already drying. And again, back to our permanent violet. Now this, I see I moved some of my masking fluid, so I'll have to be a little more careful painting around that. Just the top of that bud. Working my way around. Grabbing a little more pigment on there. And I'm going to go ahead and just paint this little space as well, because later I will make it set back a little bit more with some darker color. And the brushes I'm using are Royal and Langnickel. And this is a number 10, but it still has a fabulous point on it, so I don't have to necessarily change out my brush. Going back in here before it dries too much, I might be getting a bloom. And I'm going to take a little of my Prussian blue, bringing that all the way down, filling in this entire space. Again, I'll be going over this once again when it's dry. I'm getting quite a bloom here. So what I think I'll do is just try to move that around. Putting some more aqua. More violet. Just adding back in the colors that I've already put on here. And now I'll just take some water and hopefully that will all work together. And watching that little puddle of paint there, I'm going to try and just see if I can move that around as I put my finger in the bottom here. And that's moving. So hopefully I won't have to blot any of that up. I'm going to see how far I can get it to go. But it's kind of stalling here, so I'm just going to give it a little help and work it down a little further. Oh, there we go. And you can see already that how the color has a tendency to dry back. And we can move up to this part of the cactus. And again, I'm going to start with my green gold on this edge. And then the Quin gold. Aqua. So reminding myself to not paint over my little cactus pears. Just kind of moving around. This is the violet. And I think I'll bring a little more of the aqua in over here. I see I missed a little spot on this other paddle. I'll just go ahead and just fill all of this in. Took a little moisture off my brush, getting a little more pigment than water. And that's looking pretty good to me. I might drop a little more violet in over here. And again, I have a little puddle, so I can either try and move that around, but this is already dry, so I'm going to take just a damp brush that I've wiped onto my paper towel, and I can lift some of this out because it's better to go back in later and glaze over it for a little more depth rather than having to, deal with a bloom. Although sometimes I love the way those blooms look. I don't know, they're just doing their thing. So, that's what the paint wants to do, especially, again, on this bright white paper. And I'm not certain what causes that. But let's just continue. Again, let's start with our green gold. Moving over here. I got to be careful not to put my hand into what I've already painted. Usually I like to rest my hand on my paper. So I'm challenging myself. Now I got quite a bit of that turquoise here, which I think I might try and lift some of that, even though I'm going right over my cactus pears. But just so you know, you can do this. And I will probably blot that with a clean paper towel. So I just like to take the edge of that and I'm trying to go where those pears are. If it's dry enough, generally it will keep the paint from working its way in there. We'll see. That's our Quin Gold. I'm going to go over to this edge as well. More green gold here. And let's see if I can work my way around there. Looks pretty good. I did not retrace that. I'm going to get some of my green. Come around here. I'm going to do a little sap green as well. And I'm working my way over to my violet. And I have the liberty to just paint right down to that flower and over it and not be concerned. Get a little of my Prussian blue. Which mixed with the green gold underneath makes a nice cactus green. Now we can finish up the rest of these petals. And again, I will start with my green gold. Coming up here to the top. Working into my Quinacridone Gold. Again, it's nice I can just not worry about having to work around these flowers. And then I'm going to get the aqua green. which isn't that beautiful. I love it. And then a little Prussian blue. Pull me down to my permanent violet, and here I do have to paint around my little shapes. Bringing some water to this edge here. And I'm putting a little bit more of the aqua. And finishing up with my violet up here at the top, watching that little bead of water trying to even everything out. So I'm going to just lift there, and later I can glaze over. And just this last paddle at the bottom here, starting again with my green gold. Getting a little more of my Quinacridone Gold over here on my palette. Getting into those little spaces with my nice pointy brush. Keeping that color moving. That's probably a little too much of that, so we'll water that down. That's the aqua. And I'll bring a little of it over to this edge as well. And I'm going to get a little of the green gold to bring right in here at the top. And keep that moving around. So I ended up just using a few colors after all in my cactus, but I like to have choices. Something else I want to show you is I went in and cleaned up some of these hard lines, and I have, again, I think I showed you this, my little filbert brush that I use for cleaning up, and I just get some clean water, and you can see some of these spaces I'm going to be glazing over so I can fix those, and I'm not quite sure what's going on around this little fella, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm just very gently rubbing with this wet brush. And I have to say the paint moves fairly quickly on this bright white paper. And what I do is I just blot it with a paper towel. And I'll be painting over that. This paper does tend to dry fairly quickly, and I have gotten a lot of blooms. So let's see if we can fix some of those by glazing. And let's start here. I'm going to be using some of my permanent violet to start. And I don't want this to get too dark because there's more things behind it that are dark. So just trying to even it out. So I put a little paint down, then I just get some water, put that water a little further away, and bring it in to meet that color, so that color has somewhere to go and hopefully won't be making any more blooms. I have to move this here, and I can move up into this area. And the other thing is that, yes, these blooms actually clean up fairly well with just a little water as well. So I can work those around, and I think that's about all I'll do on that right now. Now this has a bloom as well that I would like to move, so I'm going to just take some water, and this is a pretty hard line, so I want to soften that. So this is just another technique for cleanup, and you should be able to do this on just the natural white paper as well, but it may not move quite as much as it does on here, but that also depends on what color paint you're using, if it's permanent, if it stains the paper. So in here I think I'm going to drop in a little bit more of my green gold. Let's see how that works, and maybe some of the aqua. I'm mixing the aqua with a little bit of the sap green, and I'll bring that over. Just feels like it needs a little something, and maybe even a little of my Prussian blue in here. And now just taking some water again, just to even things out. And I did scrub this a little earlier, so it does seem to be dry. I might be better off with a little smaller brush. So I'm getting an 8 here. Again, I'm grabbing a little more of the Prussian blue, and also keeping an eye on this side. I'm going to bring these down, this water down here. Still painting around my little pears. Dropping a little more of the aqua in through here. I've always had a tendency to blend my colors when I do my watercolor. Just a little taste of that Prussian blue down in here. And this helps define your shapes, a little bit of negative painting. And I'll just work that up here a little bit more. We'll see how that dries, and hopefully don't get another bloom. Now I also wanted to go in behind here and make these petals in the back a little darker. So I'm going to start off with some of my aqua. And again, this is where I can kind of clean up that edge of that petal right in front of it. And I'll be bringing some of my Windsor Violet behind here as well to really show some depth in the background. I think I'll take a little bit of the green gold and drop it in here. Pulling this right over to the edge, and then I'll get some of the permanent violet. And I might want to transition from this violet to that aqua with a little bit of the Prussian blue, just the tiniest bit. Let's do that. And I think that worked fairly well. I like it. Now there's another back here, so we could go ahead and work on that one. I'm going to turn my paper around so that I have a little better access to that. And there's a cactus pear here. So I'm starting with the aqua. Putting a little bit of the Prussian blue in here. And then going into the violet. So just working those same colors right here on the paper. And again, I'm going to take a little bit of green gold at the top edge. See how that might give us a little bit of lightness on that edge. And that looks good. Those are really the only two in the background. The rest is just information, but we could add more. Now this one here, it's pretty dark behind here, so let's go ahead and take some of our deep color. I'm getting some Prussian blue here, and I think I'll add some of the violet. Using quite a bit of pigment. And a nice point on my brush. Maybe a little aqua at the bottom here. And I'm considering maybe adding a paddle in the background here and possibly at the top. So let's go ahead and just start to bring one in here. I'm going to just make a little line here. Just kind of a shape in the background. Just information. This is a little of the green gold. So moving those colors around. Again, I'm trying to use quite a bit of pigment for this application, so they're a little bit deeper. And then I'm going to go on to the other side of this little pear. That's some of the Prussian blue. And I'll get some more of the violet as well. In this case, in fact, I'm going to go into my Windsor Violet, which is a much richer color, very intense. And I'm going to drop that in here. Wanted to push that other petal up here forward. I might have to drop a little back in here as well. And it's all coming along. We will be working on our pears and our flowers eventually. Again, I went in here and washed this out, so I want to clean it up, but I probably should wait until these other are dry. So I could go in and work here with that deep Windsor Violet. My cleanup color. Dropping a little of my Prussian blue into that. And when that's dry, now this paper does dry fast. I could do that. I might wait another moment. I might go in here and clean this up a little, get a little more of my permanent violet. I do have quite a bloom in there. So glazing over our initial wash and some of our second glazes. Here I'm taking some of the aqua. And I think I'll use some of my sap green down at this edge here. Now I'm hoping that did not leak under that masking fluid. I've never seen that happen, but I suppose there's a first. This is more sap green. I think I'll transition this aqua with that. And over here I want to keep this fairly light. I'm just putting some water right now, just to keep that color moving. And I'm going to grab some of my green gold and some of this is the Quinacridone Gold. And just a damp brush to just integrate those. I already see this drying. Keep moving. So So there's a little space back in here that I can go ahead and use my Windsor Violet to define. And this looks dry. I'll go ahead and do the same at this edge. Yeah. So everything's starting to work its way towards completion on the paddles at least. So I'm going to go in here with the Windsor Violet. And I think, in fact, I will make a dark area here and sort of define the edge of another paddle that's behind here. So we can find other spots that, might want that same treatment as we move along. I may go ahead and, let's see, I'm not quite sure where I might want one more back in here. Maybe through here. Turn it this way. So I have a couple of pears here that I don't want to cover up. So I'll work my way around those first. And I see I have a little drop of masking fluid in there, undiscovered until this moment. A little bit of green gold here. This is so close to the edge of the paper that, a lot of this might not even show in the long run, but I always like to paint to the edge, and this is a little of the Quinacridone Gold. So we just continue working our way around these shapes and bringing more depth to our painting. Bringing some of the aqua in here. if this is dry. It looks to be. Filling in here with our Windsor Violet. And it starts to push things forward, giving some depth. And I do want to finish here. And I may be adding one more just because it's just a lot of area. So I think I'll go ahead and fill this in with the deep violet. And rounding that out here. Finishing up this edge, this corner edge. So I love negative painting, and that's what I'm doing here. Using some of what I already have in the background to become another shape. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill this one in. And we covered most everything. Just have to finish this paddle and bring some color to that one. In the meantime, I would like to redefine these cactus pears. And here's another example of where you could wash this out. So this is another example of, something you might want to wash out. I kind of lost the corner of my cactus pear, so again, just taking my small filbert and just washing that out gently. And then I can block that with my paper towel. So anything like that, you can clean up a little. You can go in now and fill in this, and it's a little bit darker now. It's going to be a little darker behind this other paddle. And I'm going to be bringing some of that violet in. Right up to this little cactus pear here. And I might lift a little at the top and drop kind of a mixture of the aqua and the green, so it looks a little more connected. Now I can just finish up this one, and then we can maybe remove our masking fluid and start working on our pears and our flowers. Now we're ready to finish up our cactus pears. I'm going to be using my Rose Madder Genuine, my transparent orange, some green gold, and probably some of my lemon yellow, my cadmium-free lemon yellow. So let's get started. I already practiced over here, and I'm happy with those results, kind of thinking of the light coming from the left. This one was a little blue, and I did go over that, but let's work on some of the others. I'll start with the Rose Madder on the shadow side, and I'll just be hopping around the page working on all of these. So this is the transparent orange and some green gold here. If you feel it needs a little more of a highlight, you could drop some of the lemon yellow in. But that's pretty much what I'm going to be doing on all of these. And so let's just go ahead and finish these up. Again, I'm just mixing the color on the paper. And just letting it blend that way. And I'm hoping that one layer of color will be enough, because really our focus is going to be these flowers. So we'll be spending a little more time finishing this painting with the flowers. And one of the other things that I was experimenting with here before I came back on camera was where the the sharps come out, as my son used to say. That's what he called his swords. So we can, put these in. I just used like my #1 brush and some Quinacridone burnt orange. And if you can't see those little circles, you can go ahead and pencil them back in, or, just make them up as you go along. And there we go. I'm just going to move on ahead with the rest of these. I'm happy with the way they look against our cool background. Now we have all of the cactus pears and the little circles. It's like a pattern on our paddles. That's all finished, so we can go ahead now and take off the masking fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start. If you have fresh masking fluid, you can often lift it off in one piece like that. It's nice to get it started with this rubber cement pickup, and that will take it up as well. But again, your paint has to be thoroughly dry before you even attempt this. So if you even suspect anything is a little bit wet, you want to wait. I love doing that. And you can see it just leaves. Now we'll be finishing up the flowers, and I'm going to be doing a wash of my cadmium-free lemon, and I have my cadmium-free yellow out here as well. And I'm going to do this fairly lightly. This is more of the lemon than the yellow. And I did get a little bit of paint onto my flower up here, and so that's an area where I might go in and use a little of that white ink to cover some of those splotches. So I have my transparent orange and my rose madder out as well. And the other thing we will be addressing, all these cactus pears have, little dots on them as well. So we will be using some Quinacridone burnt orange for that. And so I was kind of experimenting with a few tools I have, how to make those dots. So, here's some of what I came up with. I started with a Q-tip, and that was way too big. And a couple of other things that I didn't think worked, but I do have this incredible nib, and it's kind of dull. This is actually made to apply masking fluid, and I personally never found it to be very helpful. But here, I'm just going to be dipping it into my paint, and then I'm just kind of dotting that. You might want a little more pigment, and you'll probably have to go in fairly often, but I feel like that can work. You can also use a real stick right out of your backyard. Do the same, just mixing it into your paint. I have to admit, I did soak these ahead of time. This is maybe just a little too small. And one of the other things we use quite a bit are chopsticks, and I just sharpen them in the electric pencil sharpener. And this one I decided I would just kind of smash the tip a little, so it kind of frayed it out. And when I tried that, that really spoke to me about where these cactus needles are surrounding the top and the body of these cactus pears. So that was what I felt worked the best. And chopsticks, you can get these anywhere, probably the dollar store. These are a little bit better bamboo than some of the less expensive ones, so I do recommend something that's a little more sturdy. I'll just continue with my yellow on the flowers. I may even bring in a little opera or opera rose, which is that hot pink color. I'm not certain. I'm thinking about that. So I'm doing the open flowers with this lemon, and some of the unopened buds are actually greener and a warmer color, so maybe a little bit more of the transparent orange or even the rose madder. So we'll see as we move around once again. And I did want to also point out that I dropped a little bit of masking fluid right here. I have a little dot, and I didn't notice it until I started removing everything. So I can just try to go in and cover that up later. So for the little buds, I think I'll go in with my cadmium yellow, and I'm going to put a little bit of the transparent orange into that. And just start bringing that in. And again, I see a little color got in here. We'll just bring some of that. And what it does is that these get pushed back a little bit more, and the yellow, warmer flowers come to the foreground. And that's fine. You don't want everything to be vying for your eye. And one other thing I wanted to mention is the inside of these tops. I'm going to just bring a little color in there as well. Maybe just a little drop of the red on this side, just to give them a little feeling of being curved. So there's not much to that. There's perhaps a little more shadow on this side because that's the way the light's coming. And that might need a little more attention. But that's good enough for this, and I'm going to just let that dry. This paper does dry very quickly, but I want to be glazing a little bit more warm color into the flowers, so I'll wait for that to dry. We'll be taking some of our cadmium-free yellow and mixing it with some of this transparent orange, maybe a little more yellow than orange. Let's water that down. And we'll be washing that into some of these petals. And you can paint around the pistils and stamens, or maybe later we can just go in and define those a little better. So I'm doing this fairly lightly. I'm going to take some of my opera and just drop it at the base of some of these spaces I've already filled. Just integrating that in. Trying to keep it lighter at the tips of some of these back petals. And this one could use a little of this depth here. Again, I'll put some of the opera. Just watching this, maybe I need to add a little more, but I like to integrate it because this paper doesn't do the job I would prefer. And they're just using a little water. And this could be a little bit more defined. But again, trying to keep this a little lighter, so I'm going to drop some of the lemon in here. And maybe across this petal as well. Bringing a little shadow here, and again I'll put a little of the opera. And it would be a little darker under where this petal turns. And at the base it can be a little lighter. And again, I'm going to just drop a little bit more of this opera in. Just continuing with defining the depth of these petals. And leaving, some areas light so they kind of frame out what's a little bit more in shadow. This is the lemon. More of my orange in here, and maybe a little bit of opera. I'll bring that down here as well. Trying to keep some of the vibrancy by dropping in this lemon yellow. And even lifting a little. I might just leave a little space here. And back to the lemon to, again, try to maintain some of that lightness. I can drop a little water in there and lift. You start to see the shape evolve. I'm going to keep going in and trying to get a little more definition. This is actually the rose madder here. And maybe I'll bring a little to that back side as well. Getting some of my orange. And that's a little wet, so I might want to blot that. I can go over to this petal. And make it a little deeper here. And wash that in. Again, this is the orange. Getting a little water. Starting to see some of the depth in our petals here. It's a little easier to blend color on this bright white paper when you're just working on the white paper rather than the wash that we did for the base of our cactus petals. So I'm mixing in, the opera, a little orange. Getting some definition in our beautiful cactus flowers. here I'm going to mix some of the orange with some opera. And get some shadow underneath that petal, those two petals. I'm blending that. I could use a little more yellow at my tips of my petal there. And then back to that mixture to get in here. Now the brush I'm using is looks like a 5. I'm starting to lose my my words on here. Just wearing them down. But whatever brush you have that has a nice point is what you want for this. And again, I'm grabbing some of my lemon and blending it into that. I just keep going back and forth and defining the petals. And you know, this is one of the most detailed flowers on the painting because it has the center showing, which the others do not. Just blending that with some water. And this actually is going to come down here. And we'll put a little bit of a shadow here as well. Just washing that in as we've done the others. I do feel that right here we need a little separation. And then here we need a little shadow. And I'll wash that up to that little turn there. Maybe add a little of my yellow. And then I'm going to try to keep this a little lighter perhaps, if I can. So putting some lemon on that. Just going to wipe this off right here. So I'll wait for that to dry before I do this petal at the bottom here. Going to define another petal here, actually. Here we go. Down this bottom one. And I think we'll just need a little bit of a line here. And I'll soften that in with some water and a little of the lemon. So it starts to come together. And I see one more area here, right behind this petal. So I want to have enough paint for some contrast, making sure it's not damp. This is the lemon. And I'll just use some water to soften that. I think I'll put a little more lemon up here. And actually, that's covering up that little spot. And maybe just a little highlight on the edge of that one. For the last part of our painting, we're going to be working on the needles of the cactus. And I do have the white ink, but I think I'm going to just work with my white gouache, which I just water that down. It's still pretty thick. And this way, if I get one in a direction I'm not happy with, I can move it because the white ink is permanent. So and maybe this is more what we want. The white ink might be, you know, a little too much on here. And I'm kind of putting them in all different directions. I'm just going to finish up these needles. As I say, you want to work them in different directions. You don't have to make them quite this long. If you want to make them a little smaller, you could do that as well. So there's an example. And I, of course, had done all my little circles earlier. Let's add one there. There's the artistic license at work. When you're doing a painting, and like this one, for instance, you have to look at the overall finished product and try not to focus on one thing that you feel like didn't go quite right. And it's a whole, so you have to look at it as a finished whole piece. And maybe just a little more, let's see, touches of white in these flowers to give them a little bit more depth. And so I'm going to say that's complete. I hope you enjoy it. It was quite an interesting project. And once again, I will say honestly that I struggled with this bright white paper, and I wouldn't recommend it for doing this kind of glazing. But in the long run, I feel like it all worked, and so kind of a fun project. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed painting this Flowering Cactus watercolor project with me today and some of the tips that I shared with you in this video. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And I'd love to hear your comments below on anything else you'd like to see me paint in watercolor in the future. Thanks for joining me here today. I certainly appreciate it and look forward to having you join me again in the future.